Okay, welcome everyone to Blue School, Alabama Blue School. This is our May session, and the topic of our session this evening is understanding the organization of the Democratic Party. And Tabitha Isner is going to be presenting to us this evening. She's the vice chair of the Alabama Democratic Party. And thank you very much to Tabitha for talking to us about this. I want to just say a couple of quick words about Alabama Blue School. So Blue School is a series of trainings, and it is by local Alabama Democratic organizers for local Alabama Democratic organizers. What we're trying to do is make all the information that anyone would need in order to be engaged in democratic activity in their local community. We want to make that information available and easily accessible for people. And one of the reasons we want to do that is to make sure that we all know and feel that being involved and engaged in politics is not something that we need to have any special qualifications for. We don't need to be professionals at it. This is, we are the people, and this country is an experiment in self-governance. And that can be very messy. It has to be because we're human beings and we're chaotic. But the more we get together, the more different voices that we listen to, the more we learn, the better decisions we make. So that's, I know those are big ideas, but that's really what we're trying to do here. We're trying to just welcome everyone to attend these sessions. So all of you are welcome. All of you are more than qualified to do the work of the Democratic Party right where you live. I'm gonna hand the time over to Tabitha, and she's gonna have the floor. When she's done, we will have time for questions. We will just be taking questions in the chat. So if you have a question, please drop it in the chat. If you're on a phone and you have issues with that, you can raise your hand, and we'll see what we can do about that when we come to that point. Okay, so Tabitha, thank you for joining us this evening and for presenting. Oh, there's Sarah Todd joining us from Georgia. I'm not going to name check everybody because we've got tons of great people here this evening. Let's hand the floor over to Tabitha, and thank you so much again.
Yeah. Thank you for having me. I'm a big fan of Blue School, and I love this. And I can't echo enough what Emily said about, kind of what this is all about. And democracy is a messy, it's a contact sport, as they say, and you're in it. So I'm gonna do, oh, can I have screen sharing? I'm going to crank through some material. 1 hour to describe how the entire party works is clearly not enough. So we're going to go at fairly high speed, and hopefully we'll have some time left to answer some questions as we get later into it. So. All right. So step number 1, who is the party? You are. So Emily kind of gave this speech already, but I want to just echo and say, I think about the party, very often if you say like, I had a really good time at that party, what you mean is not the planning of the party. What you mean is the party itself, the moment when all the people were together, doing the thing together, having the fun together. That's the party. But a lot of things go into the party, right? So in the case of a political party, the moment, the party that's so much fun is election day. and we intend to have the biggest, baddest, bluest party that can be had. But a lot of planning goes into the party ahead of time. It's not just sending invitations, it's also preparing all the food, making sure everybody knows each other ahead of time so they feel good about coming. There's a lot of work that goes into making a party a fun place to be. And but at the end of the day, you are as much the party as any of the people who planned it. And so we mean both things when we talk about the party, the people who planned it and the people who are part of it on party day. So, but I'm going to talk about that org structure, the people who are planning things kind of very often behind the scenes. All right, so we're going to start with the state party. What does the state party do? It qualifies candidates for state and federal offices. And what that means, it has nothing to do with your qualifications. So say you're qualifying to be governor, it has nothing to do with whether you're actually qualified to be governor. I think a governor should be someone who has executive experience and management experience and government experience. Those are all the qualities that I think would qualify a person, but qualifying is not about that when we use it in the political sphere. What we mean by qualifications, by qualifying a candidate, is that we take their paperwork and we get them on the ballot. So when we talk about if you hear someone talking about running for office and they want to know if they qualify, the answer is, can you fill out a form? If so, you qualify. That's pretty much all that's required for almost all positions in Alabama. You often have to live in the district, but not always. You often have to be of a certain age, like 25, but it depends on the position. So it's really about taking in the paperwork and then putting a person's name on the ballot. And the state party does that for state and federal candidates. Whereas we'll talk later about county parties. County parties qualify candidates at the local level. And so that's a different process, but both involve collecting some cash. The state party also, a key task on its list is to send a delegation to the national convention. So the national convention is the event once every 4 years where Democrats across the state get together and decide who's going to be the next Democratic nominee for president. And that event happens at a different location each 4 years, and thousands of people are present, and each state gets to send a delegation. So depending on the size of your state and the blueness of your state determines how many people you get to send. So Alabama just completed its delegate selection plan, and that's the plan for how we're going to pick the people who get to go to that convention. Once they get there, they need to vote the way they're supposed to vote. They have to vote for the candidate that they pledged themselves to, and that would be representative of how we, the primary voters, voted. So we can talk more about the national convention and the delegate selection plan if you're interested, but that's a key responsibility of the state party. The state party also hears challenges and disqualifies candidates. So if for some reason a candidate doesn't seem to be a legit Democrat or doesn't seem to be a legit person for the job, they can be challenged and the party can remove a person from the ballot. And that can happen before the person's name goes on the primary ballot. It can also happen after. So there have been instances in Alabama, including one this last election cycle, where a Democratic candidate won the primary and then was disqualified, was challenged and disqualified. And that person was no longer the Democratic nominee. And the state committee picked a new person to put on the ballot for the general election. That person didn't even run in the primary, but was put on the general election ballot and won. So that's another thing the state party does. The state party also gives or sells access to Vote Builder. So the Vote Builder data comes from national to the state parties, and the state parties then give it or sell it to candidates and others. The state party also should be doing programs of voter registration and public education and public relations and all the good stuff that we want to see our parties do. But what's required is those other things. What's required of the state party is that it qualify candidates and send a delegation and manage vote builder and take care of challenges. So the party has to do those things even when it's not doing some of the other stuff we might want to see. You'll also notice that what's not on this list is supporting candidates. That is not actually a core function of the state party. So it is something that state parties could do, but it is not something that they are expected to do. So another thing we could talk about if we had all the time in the world. Okay, how is the state party funded? So a decent amount of money comes from the DNC and from a related organization called the Democratic Grassroots Victory Fund. And that money comes every month, and it is intended, every state gets money from the DNC, and the intention there is that it covers the cost to have an office, an executive director. The bare minimum of basics should be a reliable source of money to make sure you always have an office and an executive director. Then, of course, additional money can come from individual donors. Additional money comes on election years from qualifying fees, but not on non-election years. That's a source of money that dries up on a non-election year. It is not legal in Alabama for PACs to give other PACs money. So at this point in time, you will not hear of, there are not going to be county parties giving to the state party or vice versa. PACs that are raising money, political action committees that are raising money for Democrats can't give money to the state party. And that complicates things. It's always more complicated than I'm going to do it in this PowerPoint, but that's the basic story. No PAC to PAC transfers. All the spending, however, that the state party does is publicly tracked. One complication about this is that a state party is both operating in federal elections, Congress, Senate, and president, and is also operating in state elections, all the rest of them. And so how the money gets reported depends on what the money is used for. So when you give money to the party, if you were to give money to the party, you would see that the donation page would say either federal or state. And when money is spent, they have to designate whether the money is being spent on state things or federal things. All federal spending and collection is monitored by the Federal Election Commission. And that website is something that I'd be happy to teach y'all about sometime. All state spending, fundraising and spending is tracked via the Alabama Secretary of State's website. And the Fair Campaign Practices Act governs that process. So almost all of that is public. I won't go into all the details, but it's almost all the way public. All right, so who is on the state committee? So this is complicated. There are 210 district representatives on the state committee. And again, every state has a state committee. We call ours the State Democratic Executive Committee, the SDEC. Some people call that SDEC. Some people say SDEC. I don't care. Call it whatever you want. It's the state committee. And we elect during the primary of each gubernatorial election year. We elect 2 people from each House district. That's state House district. So there are 105 state House districts in Alabama, and we elect 2 people from each of those state House districts to be on this statewide committee. Those people need to be of opposite genders. Let me clarify. Depending on which bylaws you're reading, those people need to be of opposite genders, or those people need to be of different genders, and non-binary counts as a different gender than male, different than female. So we elect those 210 people via the primary. That assumes that everyone runs for office. And you qualify for that to run on the primary ballot by paying your qualifying fee and filling out your qualifying form with the state party. And assuming all of those seats are filled, that becomes the 210 base members of the state Democratic Committee. Then we do an analysis of those people who were elected to determine whether the demographics of the 210 are representative of the demographics of the state as a whole, and whether it's representative of the demographics of the Democratic electorate, defined as the people who voted for the Democratic candidate in the last presidential election. Complicated, I know. So whichever, so let's say that in Alabama, Alabama is 5% LGBTQ, and the Democratic electorate is 8% LGBTQ. So we would pick the higher of those two numbers. According to our old bylaws, we pick the higher of those two numbers, the 8%, and that becomes the goal for the LGBTQ representation on the committee. So those, every 4 years, we have a meeting, we get together, we look at the diversity goals that are set based on that demographic analysis, and we determine how many additional people need to be added to the state committee. There are two sets of bylaws we're arguing about right now, so I'm trying to explain a little bit of both. But one of the points of contention is who will decide who those people are. When we have to add, let's say we have to add 10 more LGBTQ members, who gets to decide which 10 LGBTQ people get added to the committee? This last August, it was decided by other LGBTQ members of the 210. Those folks got together and elected additional folks to add to the committee at large. So the same is true for Black, Hispanic, Native American, AAPI, LGBTQ, people age 35 and younger, which we call youth, and people with disabilities. So we add additional people that can raise the size of the committee significantly. And then having done all that, then we elect our officers. Officers are elected. They do not have to be district representatives. They don't have to be at-large representatives. You can run even though you weren't elected at the district level nor elected at large. It also includes DNC members. So if you're on the DNC, you don't have to run for the state committee. You're automatically a member of the state committee. Am I going too fast, too slow? Are we surviving? All right. Meet the officers of the Alabama State Democratic Executive Committee, the officers of the Alabama Democratic Party, however you want to say it. So our chairman is Randy Kelly, and I'm the first vice chair. And Joe Reed is the vice chair for Minority Affairs. Ben Harris is the vice chair for County Affairs. Bradley Turner is the vice chair for Labor Affairs. James Parker for Youth Affairs. And then we have a secretary and a treasurer. All of these positions are elected except for the treasurer. The chairman gets to appoint the treasurer, and the executive committee stamps approval on that. I don't think it's ever questioned. It's just sort of a formality. All of these positions except for vice chair are elected by the body as a whole, except for vice chair for youth affairs. So James Parker was elected by the youth caucus. All of the other, and Joe Reed was elected by the minority caucus, the Black caucus. All other positions were elected by the body as a whole. So that's our team. All right. So then there's the executive board. So that executive committee, that state committee, is 275 people. The executive board is a much smaller group. That's the group that functions more like a board. And that board is made up of the officers, all of whom are elected except the treasurer, 2 representatives from each congressional district that are selected by, that are elected by other members of the state committee in those congressional districts. Plus DNC members also get to automatically be on the executive board. And then if the board, after those folks are added, if the board is not representative of the Democratic electorate or the Alabama population, then additional at-large members can be added to the committee to reach those diversity goals. So the committee was 25 people until February, and in February, the executive board added 12 new members for at-large. All right. Also, I should say the state committee, it's a 4-year term. So you're elected on the primary ballot. Then we have an organizational meeting in August where additional at-large members are elected and officers are elected. Then it's a 4-year term on the executive board. And although the bylaws do say if you skip too many meetings, you can be kicked off. So no skipping of meetings. Okay, so DNC members. So the policy of the DNC is that the chair and first vice chair automatically get a seat on the DNC. And then additional seats are allocated to the states. Alabama currently has 2 additional seats, and those people run also on a primary ballot. So Caroline Self and Josh Coleman were elected to those 2 seats. And then there are additional people who are on the DNC, and I'll come back to that later. And if you're on the DNC, you're on the state committee. So Charlie Staten is on the committee. It should not say vice chair for labor affairs. Apologies. That is an erroneous label. Charlie Staten is on the DNC because of his role as a municipal leader. All right, so then we also have these caucuses, and the caucuses elect chairs. And so you can see here we have the Youth Caucus Chair, the LGBTQ Caucus Chair, the Black Caucus Chair, Native American Caucus Chair, Hispanic Caucus Chair. The AAPI caucus has not been able to get up and running, so there is no chair yet for that caucus. And the Disability Caucus has also not met to name a chair. So those are blanks for now. All right. There we go. Do we have any questions about state stuff before I move on to county?
Yeah, do we want to go through a couple of these questions now before we move on? Okay. So one question that we just had, I'll read to you. I'm from South Carolina. Our elections were held in a county party meeting, not in a primary. So I'm assuming elections for their state committee. Only active Democratic Party members were allowed to vote. I'm a bit confused by this being on a primary ballot.
Yeah, so every state makes their own rules, and there are a couple different options for how you can select people. So some states do primaries, some states do caucuses, and some states elect people from their county party organizations. There's a great deal of variation in how state committees are established. What is consistent is that the state has to make that plan and pass it by the DNC, and the plan has to include how you're going to meet diversity goals. So you have to set diversity goals and you have to meet those diversity goals, but there are lots of different ways to do it.
And again, so those are going to be in the Democratic Party primary during gubernatorial election years. Is that correct?
Here in Alabama, yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Mhm.
Couple more questions. Here's one. Minority is not synonymous with Black. Is it the Black caucus or the minority caucus, which would include non-Black minorities?
Yeah, so Alabama has a long history of arguing over representation. And historically, there was a lawsuit called the consent, which resulted in a consent decree. We often just refer to it as the consent decree. Um, and that lawsuit was about minority representation in the state party. At the time, what was meant was Black. Folks were not thinking particularly about other minorities. And so a whole bunch of things were built into our system using the term minority when what really people meant was Black. So it was only in 2019 that the state party began recognizing other minority groups besides Black. And it's just kind of a holdover from that old language that the Black caucus gets called the minority caucus. However, there are new bylaws under consideration that would lump all minorities together under sort of a minority caucus. And so all of those minorities would then be under that umbrella. Black, Asian, Hispanic, Native American, youth, LGBTQ, and disability.
Okay. Couple more questions before we move on. So there was a question about how DNC members were selected. You went over that. This other question here, how do we determine the percentage of Alabama voters who are LGBTQ, and then how many people within the Democratic electorate are LGBTQ? So that's a question about how the party would determine those at-large members. So where does that information come from?
So it ain't easy, especially in a state like Alabama where you don't register as a Democrat or a Republican. So in states where there's party registration, it's easier to decide what percentage of the electorate is in various demographic groups because you know who's a Democrat and who's not for sure. Whereas in Alabama, we can assign probability scores that you're a Democrat based on what primary you vote in and based on demographics and other things, but it's only a guess, only an estimate. So the DNC does provide assistance with this. If a state, the DNC provides every state with the DNC's calculations of what the Democratic electorate demographics look like. And the DNC provided that to Alabama as well. And then states are supposed to work with the DNC on those diversity goals. So if the state wants to use a different calculation, they're supposed to be doing that in collaboration with the DNC. So I think, can I pivot from that to counties?
Let's pivot from that to counties. And I want to add one thing really quickly, just circling back to how these committee members and DNC reps are chosen. This is the reason that we don't vote in the Republican primary anymore. We've got to vote in our own primary because that's where our state party representation comes from and our county party representation comes from. So let's go into the good county stuff.
Yeah. Okay. So the county party does a lot of the same things that the state party does. They qualify candidates for local offices. So this would be anything that's a partisan election at the local level, which may not be a whole lot where you are. It depends on what the rules are locally for your municipal offices, county commission, et cetera. But the county does make some money that way. They also hear challenges and disqualify candidates. So that's a responsibility that the county party can do for any candidate that they qualified. They can then change their mind. So again, I don't know if I emphasized this enough the first time, but like the party decides who the nominee is. We do primaries, but it's a courtesy to the voters This is how it's been explained to me. I don't really believe this in my heart, but it is a courtesy to the voters that we usually go with who they picked in the primary. Like, the state party doesn't have to go with who won the primary, and the county party doesn't have to go with the candidate who won the primary. It is up to the party to decide. Again, generally speaking, we go with the candidate that won the primary, but legally, it is the party's decision, not the voters. Do with that what you will. The county party also is responsible for recruiting candidates. I put this on the county party shoulders, not on the state party shoulders, because I don't think anybody can know everybody there is to know in a state. I really think this has to largely be done at the local level to recruit. I think the state party should play a role in helping people find someone who wants to run, helping them find the right seat to run for, knowing who else is running. But it's really local folks who have to do the recruiting. You're at the local level, you're going to know who in your community has the gifts, has the talent to do this kind of work. So it has to come from you first and foremost. The county party is also responsible for voter protection. The state has a role to play in this, but it's the county party that would supply poll workers to the county election center, and would also supply poll watchers at each of the precinct locations to monitor and make sure that voters are able to vote fairly. And of course, county parties can do voter registration and public education and public relations, all of that. County parties are expected to meet quarterly in non-election years and to meet monthly in election years. They're also expected to have a headquarters set up 90 days before an election. So that doesn't always happen, but that is the expectation in the state bylaws for the Democratic Party. And if a county party is not doing that, if they're not meeting quarterly, if they're not meeting monthly in election years, a complaint can be filed. You can ask the state party to intervene and put on pressure or potentially support a change in leadership if those things are not being done. All right. The county party funding comes from, you'll notice that, so in the state party, I said the top funder or most reliable funder for state parties is the DNC. Not true, however, county parties cannot expect the same sort of support from the state party. It's not set up that way, at least not in Alabama, because we have a rule against PAC-to-PAC transfers. So the county parties are generally funded by individual donors, qualifying fees, membership fees. Some counties request or suggest a membership fee. Again, no PAC-to-PAC transfers, so that makes fundraising a little bit more difficult. All spending is public, so this has to go through the the Secretary of State's website, and the county party has to file that money there, assuming the county party is raising enough money to qualify. If we're talking about tiny amounts of money, the state does not require that money be tracked in the same way. All right, so then the county committee is made up of, similar to the state party, it has district representatives and at-large representatives. So the district representatives are also on your primary ballot, or they could be. In a lot of counties, nobody runs for the county executive committee, and so nobody's on your ballot. But you can get on the ballot and win a seat on the county executive committee by running on the ballot. And if you submit your name to run on the ballot and you don't have competition for that seat, you are automatically elected. So if you're interested in being part of county party leadership, put your name on that ballot, you will almost certainly get a spot. In most counties, those are not hotly contested seats. So it's an equal number from each county commission district. So it depends on how your county is set up, whether you've got 5 districts, 7 districts, whatever the magical number is. And so 30 to 36 people divided evenly among those county commission districts, and they get elected during the primary, or can be. If they're not elected during the primary, then when the party meets in August, they would fill those vacancies based on who shows up to the meeting. So again, put your name on the ballot if you want to be involved. If you forget to do that, just show up. That is what it takes to get on the committee. Almost every committee in the state, you can get on the county committee if you show up to that August meeting and say you want on the committee. So please do that. Once those district representatives are elected, and we add SDEC members as well. And then we look and determine whether additional at-large members need to be added. If so, they are added, again, based on the Democratic electorate in your county. So here's the mind-boggling part of this. So hard to figure out what percentage of the Democratic electorate is LGBTQ when people don't have to tell you that they're a Democrat and they don't have to tell you if they're LGBTQ. Somehow you still need to figure it out. Oh, the horror. So just like the state committee can ask the DNC for help, a county committee can ask the state for help, and the state will provide some numbers. These are estimates. They are guesstimates a lot of the time, but we use census data, we use polling data, and we're able to get some some sense of the demographics in your area. Once all of the members are elected, then you can vote on officers. And the officers for a county committee are chair, vice chair, secretary, treasurer, vice for minority affairs. That question about what minority means remains relevant here, not clearly defined. Vice for young adults, vice for seniors. Why we have vice for seniors at the county level and no vice for seniors at the state level, I do not know, but we don't. All of those people then are elected, and you do not have to be a district representative or an at-large representative to run for one of those officer seats. You just have to be present on the day when the election is being held. All right. So one last note about staffing. As I mentioned, the DNC provides enough funding to every state to keep an office open and a executive director staffed. So if nothing else, state parties should have an executive director. County parties sometimes hire staff. In Alabama, that's unusual, but in some states where the party is stronger, county parties do have a staff person who is hired to do organizing and keep things moving along. In contrast, the DNC is an enormous employer. Hundreds of people work at the DNC. It's a very large organization. All right, so I know I have seen lots of questions come in.
Yeah, we've got a few questions that that relate to some shared governance issues. Here's a question from Marcia in Shelby County. So in Alabama, the county parties have no input into the state party governance, but have many rules to follow as set by the state party. Is that correct?
Yes, I would say that's an accurate description.
I'm interested, Tabitha, in how you would characterize that fact. Do you think that that's a hindrance? I mean, I do think that there are clearly some problems with that. But I think when you sort of look at the responsibilities and roles of the state party versus those of the county party, the types of things that county parties are doing, recruiting candidates, supporting candidates, that's there's quite a lot of freedom there for county parties. Would you agree, or what's your take?
Yeah, I would say it's fairly unusual for the state party to intervene in a county party unless they're invited to intervene in a county party. So I don't think that it's like a very domineering relationship, generally speaking. I think the reason for it is, so county parties, Jefferson County has obviously a lot more people in it than Covington County. And certainly a lot more Democrats in Jefferson County than in Covington County. So if the representation were done at the county level, if representation on the state committee were done at the county level, it would be unfair because the representatives from Jefferson County would represent a whole lot more Democrats than the representatives from Covington County. Both have lovely parties. So I think that's why it's done at the state house district level. The representatives are chosen, members of the SDEC are chosen from districts, from state house districts, because state house districts are the same size. They're the same number of voters, whereas counties are wildly different numbers of voters. So I think that's why it's done that way. I think many of us can see why that's potentially problematic. It makes me want to bring up one other thing that I don't have slides about. I wasn't sure if we'd have time to get to it. But let's talk briefly about congressional district committees. So the state party bylaws explicitly lay out the existence of congressional district committees. And so each congressional district is the same size, our 7 congressional districts across the state, same size in terms of number of people who live there. And each congressional district is supposed to have a committee, and that committee would be made up of the members of the state Democratic Executive Committee that live in that congressional district, and also the county party leadership from each of the counties in that district. So that's a place where the county party leadership gets pulled into state party activities. And those congressional district committees can actually create a fund within the state party's budget and can put money into a fund and spend money out of the congressional district fund. Little known fact. So our congressional districts don't tend to operate as a group in that way, but there are certainly good reasons that they should be operating as a group in that way.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, we've got a few more questions here. Here's one. I'm curious as to why August for the big meeting seems awfully close to November in election years and misses the primaries entirely.
Yeah. So there's the generous interpretation and my skeptical interpretation. And let me start with the generous interpretation. So I think the people who set it up that way, I have no idea who, so I promise this isn't personal. I think the people who set it up that way probably imagined that the biggest turnout is going to be in the Democratic primaries of a gubernatorial year. And that's going to be a great time to really see who the real Democrats are. So that's when we would do, that's when we would that would be the best time to elect representatives, maybe. And maybe they would say, pretty much all the work for a campaign is done. All of the work to get up and running is done before August. I don't find it very compelling. I'm trying to make it sound like a good argument, but I don't really find it terribly compelling. I think that probably it's to benefit the incumbent, because who would want to elect a new party chair 3 months before a major election? So my sense is that that it's done then to benefit the incumbent chair. It would maybe be worse if we did it on a presidential election year in August. That would probably be worse, but I don't see why we don't just let the new leadership start their job in January or something. So I agree. I think that could be more effective.
Yeah. Okay, a couple of good questions here. Does the ADC have an executive director currently?
The ADP, is that what you
Sorry,
said?
ADP. Pardon me, ADP.
Yeah. The Alabama Democratic Party does not have an executive director currently. That position is open, and the position has been posted somewhere. I have a copy of it, but I don't know where it's posted publicly. But if someone's interested, I'm happy to send it around. Maybe we can send it out as an attachment with the.
Yeah.
But it is open and has been open. That position has been posted since at least January, maybe further back, but at least since January.
It's a tough job. I would not apply for it. Um, okay, here's another question. Is there a separate executive committee, I assume at the state level, that handles state finances?
No. So the way Alabama is set up, the chairman has a lot of authority to control almost everything about how the state party operates. So it depends on how the bylaws are written. I think I mentioned that for a county party, some of the county party bylaws explicitly say what each officer is responsible for. It'll say the secretary needs to produce minutes within so many days of the meeting, and the treasurer needs to produce a treasury report within so many days of whatever. And the vice chair is responsible for these committees, and sometimes it's laid out pretty explicitly. In the state party bylaws, none of that is laid out. It's not clear what any of the officers' roles are. And so all powers and authority falls to the chair to delegate as the chair sees fit. And that includes most things about finance and staffing as well. So the executive board is supposed to once a year approve a budget for the year. So the chairman puts forward a budget. They're supposed to put it forward by January 15th. Or maybe they put it forward by December 15th, and the executive board is supposed to vote on it by January 15th. But that's a budget to vote up or down. Not entirely clear how it's negotiated. And then day-to-day decisions are made by the chair and executive director without additional oversight from anyone. And the staffing, new positions need to be approved by the executive board. But that notion of a new position has been taken to mean only if it's a position that has never before existed. So maybe position of assistant organizing director for Southeast region existed back in 1994. Therefore, it's not a new position. Therefore, it can be filled at any time. So again, the bylaws don't prevent that. And so the chair has a lot of authority to act freely. Not a lot of accountability in the way that our bylaws are written.
There's an answer here to there was an earlier question. It was more of an expression of incredulity than a question about county party chairs choosing poll workers and poll watchers. So Marcia Sturdivant, who's chair of Shelby County, she says in Shelby County, the probate office recruits and trains poll watchers, but asks the parties to assist. So the parties are in charge of recruiting, kind of vetting, training, nominating poll watchers in the general elections. The candidates recruit poll watchers in the primaries. And I think that county chairs can also recommend some poll workers. Yeah, she says they recruit, and I think it depends. It's going to depend on your probate judge and
yes, for sure. And there is also law around poll workers being representative of the community in which they're working. And so I think that's part of the reason that very often the party has a role in recruiting poll workers to make sure that there is adequate representation in the poll workers. But it is ultimately the decision of the probate office. Good note, Marcia.
Have I missed any questions?
The DNC, FYI, does have a separate financial body, separate from the DNC committee. So I figured the DNC part could wait if we run out of time, but I'll talk briefly about DNC. So the DNC, their responsibilities, you'll notice that they're not qualifying candidates because all of the candidates are getting qualified at the state level. Even federal candidates are being qualified at the state level. Presidential candidates have to go to every single state and qualify with the state. So every Democratic candidate has to come here and pay money to the Alabama Democratic Party to get on our ballot. So the National Party doesn't do qualifying. That's not a thing they do. The only race that they really have a role in, an official role, is the presidential race, because they host the national convention. And at the national convention, the delegates are from the various states. Plus, there are additional people who are added by the DNC and get to have some say, in addition to the states, about who is the Democratic nominee. That's a fascinating argument that's happened over the course of the time of the Democratic Party. Google superdelegates if you're interested in that question, and learning more about it. So they're also responsible for setting the national platform for policies. What is the Democratic platform? They raise a ton of money. That's the number one thing that they do at the National Party. And they assist state and local parties to some extent, send us money, etc. They get their money from PACs. They have a different set of rules. So they get a lot of money from PACs, individual donors, and they get a ton of money from Democratic elected officials creating PACs to fund the party, which then favors them. It's a very you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours kind of system. But again, you can see a lot of that information is public via the FEC's website. The DNC officers are a national chairperson, 5 vice chairs, similar to what we have, a finance chair, a treasurer, and a secretary. So the finance chair and the treasurer are different roles in the DNC. And the treasurer is more about reporting, and the finance chair is more about fundraising. And there's a whole separate finance committee that's responsible for fundraising for the national committee. And there are, in addition to the state reps who go to the DNC, who serve on the DNC, there are also a handful of governors, senators, Congress members, mayors, county officials, local officials. So there's an association of municipal officers, a national association of municipal officers, and they get to elect a certain number of people to send as representatives to the DNC. So there'll be some random probate judge from small town Ohio who serves on the DNC to represent municipal officers. And they also have, the DNC also includes representatives from a variety of constituency groups, including young Dems, high school Dems, Democratic women, Democratic seniors, etc.
Here's a question about the national platform. Does it transfer down to the ADP state platform? Does the state party determine their own platform? is there currently an ADP platform?
Yes. So in theory, we're all under the Democratic platform nationally, but the state can also have its own platform. And we do here in Alabama have our own platform. It's in the Alabama Democratic Party bylaws. You can find them on the aldemocrats.org website. It's the first couple pages of the bylaws. And I don't know when they were last updated, but I would not say that anyone uses them. So not a super important part of the document.
I
Thank
have
you.
a question along those lines. In your experience in Alabama and in other states, in terms of messaging and platforms, is there a relationship between county committees and state committees? So is there overlap in messaging, overlap in platforms, or is there more of an independent relationship?
I would say it's independent. There's nothing in the bylaws that would allow the state party to like censure the county party for not following the state party platform. However, the party bylaws do say that a challenge can be brought against anyone in the state. So that would include county party officers. So let's say if the chair of Montgomery County Dems, I'm using it because it's my own county, it's very not true, but if the chair of Montgomery County Dems was publicly supporting a Republican candidate or a Republican issue, someone could file a challenge and say, this person should not be allowed to be chair of the county because their positions are not really democratic. A committee of the state party would meet privately, confidentially, and it's almost a legal event. Like witnesses are called, lawyers are brought in, witnesses are called, documentation is reviewed, and then a judgment is reached by the committee serving as the jury. And so it's not always, it's a very subjective decision. This person isn't a Democrat enough, but I am not aware of anyone. It is very much tradition that happened because a Democrat supported a Republican for some office. It is not a tradition to do that because a Democrat wasn't supporting a Democratic principle, platform idea.
Okay, thank you. We've got another question here. For clarity, is the elimination of caucuses, the diversity caucuses, a proposal or is it a part of the newly adopted bylaws?
Yeah, it is in the newly adopted bylaws. The newly adopted bylaws, if those are held, say that a caucus, a group cannot be a caucus unless the group represents 15% or more of the state committee. So it's not 15% or more of the Democratic electorate, it's 15% or more of the state committee. So that would mean getting your people elected to the state committee from district seats at an adequate number to reach 15%, or maybe you could reach it by being more than 15% of the Democratic electorate and enough at-large seats would be added that it would then become a caucus. Not entirely clear how that would work. But the difference between a caucus and a committee would be that a caucus has the right to self-determination. So when you're a caucus, you operate independently. And when an at-large position needs to be filled, the caucus decides who fills that seat. On a committee, it would not be those at-large, if an at-large seat needed to be filled, it would be the executive board that would pick someone to fill that vacancy rather than it being other members of that group. So in the case, for example, of the Asian Pacific Islander committee or a constituency. Right now, there is no, there's only one person on the entire state Democratic Executive Committee who is Asian. And so rather than having that one person pick the other members of the caucus, the idea is that the executive board would pick the other members of that committee.
Tabitha, I'm gonna close that because it's 8 o'clock. But I think let's all give Tabitha a little internet round of applause. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
And I love your patriotic colors of your your Zoom room. Thanks so much for all that great information. Yeah, and we're getting lots of thank yous in the chat. Thanks to everyone who joined us. This video, as I said in the beginning, was recorded, or this meeting was recorded and will be posted on YouTube. We are also going to have a document version of this information that we will make available to everyone who wants it. So this is the kind of information that we really think that everybody needs to understand. We get these kinds of questions a lot, those of us who work in county organizations. And I've learned a lot tonight. I think we're all going to go away with some really great information. And it was just great to learn about all of this. It's always good to know that we're part of something and that we each have a part to play, we each have a role to play and responsibilities that we can take. And I think when we look at this view of how the party is set up, for me, it makes me realize how much how much freedom and power we have really in our counties. And I think that in Alabama, we're starting to realize that and notice that, and we're starting to kind of take charge of our own county organizations and move forward with them. So yeah, I'm seeing people recruiting an army. Yeah, so next month's topic is recruiting an army of volunteers at the county level. And that's we're going to try to, one of the big projects right now in Alabama is to follow the example of Georgia. We've got Patricia Lassiter and Sarah Todd from Georgia this evening. Blue School was partly modeled on Georgia Blue School, and it was one of the initiatives that they did and have been doing and are still doing as a way of building the party from the bottom up. And so now that we understand the structure of how our party works, next month on the third Tuesday, which is, hang on, third Tuesday is the 20th of June. We will be talking about how to fill these county executive committees with lots of great Democrats. Thanks again to Tabitha, and hopefully we'll see you next month. I'm going to stop the recording.